The question is, how do we move forward?
Will anybody make real shit anymore?
You have to have these difficult conversations.
We need a complete restructure.
In a democratic process,
have political influence.
Once the viewers engage and look at what is being presented to them, they'll have a better understanding of that question.
Can you hear me now?
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Great Debate League. I'm Dr. Bruce Strobel, and we ask you to tune in tonight as we watch one of our most... I'm your moderator for this evening, and I hope you can stay with us until the end as we will rely on your votes to determine which one of our contestants is the greater debater. So again, tonight's debate is brought to you by Be Easy Graphics. Be Easy Graphics is a veteran, minority-owned creative marketing and web design agency. They are a team of visual storytellers who believe that every brand has a story, and they are actively working to build, create, and accelerate brands with scroll-stopping visual experiences, click-worthy websites, and growth-driven marketing strategies. Learn more about this organization at beeasygraphics.com. So, tonight's debate, spankings and Black children. There's a wealth of research that shows a correlation between spankings and negative behaviors later in life. However, there are some who argue that this research fails to identify spankings as the primary cause of any negative behaviors. So we hope to hash this out tonight with our two participants. And the premise for tonight's debate, spankings lead to negative outcomes for Black children. Arguing the affirmative, we have Miss Esther Anglade. She's from Linden, New Jersey. She has degrees in computer information sciences and management information sciences from Rutgers University. She's a mother and also serves as the chair of board of the directors for the Caribbean Association of North America. Her opponent, Miss Linda Sharon Spence, a mother of two and a grandmother of four. Miss Spence was educated at the University of Kansas City, Missouri, where she earned a master's in social work. She has designed and developed a child-centered trauma response program. She's worked in the foster care case management system and has also worked in advocacy on behalf of women and children for the last 25 years. So we have two great debaters here tonight, and we're really excited to see this. Our guiding definitions for tonight's debate: first, spanking, the act of striking the buttocks or another part of a child as a form of discipline. Now, we've also, with an agreement between our participants, they also will include threats of violence and degrading language as part of the activity or definition included in spanking. And also we'll define negative outcomes, which is damaging or harmful effects. So look back at that premise, spanking and negative outcomes. So this is an exhibition debate and it will be unranked. There will be no personal attacks of any kind allowed, no profanity, and no interrupting. And each participant is allowed to use one fact check timeout only during one of their designated speaking periods. So we start with round one. Each participant will be able to give an uninterrupted opening statement. And we're going to start with the affirmative opening statement from Esther.
All right. So give me 1 second. Hello, everyone. So as Bruce kindly stated and introduced me, my name is Esther Anglade. I mainly work in tech. I am a mom. Spanking is something that is personally very close to my heart as far as a topic for advocacy and for talking about Black radical self-love, right? And being able to change the paradigms of certain types of cultural norms that we've come to accept in the modern day as unchallenged in a sense, and maybe even necessary or required in positive upbringing. So to be able to highlight my arguments, I actually started off with Dr. Stacey Patton's book, Why Whooping Won't Save Children. Sorry, 1 second. I'll provide a list with all the titles and everything. I also used Spanking and Child Development. We Know Enough to Stop Hitting Children, as well, all in all about 12 different works. I won't list them all. But mainly what's been very, very clear throughout the studies is that there is no evidence that suggests that spanking actually deters any type of long-term negative outcome. There is some evidence, right, that suggests that it stops the behavior immediately, but in the long term, that doesn't necessarily stop the behavior from continuing. No, and also the evidence has consistently come back showing that spanking may lead to increased aggression and anxiety over the course of an individual's lifetime. Throughout the debate, I'm going to go over these various items and highlight how they have been, like the studies that pretty much have gone through to highlight some of these, as well as the various points of views and perspectives around African-American children in particular, right? So we can discuss things such as the incredibly high mortality rate amongst Black children. We can also, I also hope to get to and be able to cover discussions around just general mental health in the Black community. The way spanking is built into the overall what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, I'm kind of like stumbling today, but the overarching system of like white supremacy, or living in a post-colonial world where anti-Blackness is the norm, and a lot of the things that we do are motivated by a desire to protect, right? And maybe not necessarily in the best ways. For me, that pretty much concludes most of my opening statement. I'm more than happy to yield the rest of the time to my opponent.
Thank you. Resolved. Spanking leads to negative outcomes for Black children. My worthy opponent affirms this statement. I will attempt to show that not only does spanking not necessarily lead to negative outcomes for Black children, but in fact, its use in moderation and when paired with other non-abusive alternatives, spanking can be a useful tool that may help prepare the child for navigating a prejudiced social order constructed on a contrived fear of the Black body, and is reinforced by principles of conservative Protestant religious views. Spare the rod, spoil the child. This adage has guided parental and social thoughts on discipline for decades, the roots of which can be traced to religion, particularly the conservative Protestant view, which posits a goal of compliance and parental authority. If, according to Minton, Kagan, and Levine, quote, one of the most important and most salient tasks for parents of young children is discipline, end quote, then again, according to them, it follows that, quote, parents discipline their children predicts crucial aspects of children's positive and negative interpersonal behaviors, including the extent to which children comply with parental directives, end quote. Minton, Kagan, and Levine are three researchers who investigated the intersection of religion and disciplinary punishment. Further data from 2016 estimates that religious affiliation in America shows Christians represent 73.7% of the total population. 48.9% identify as Protestants. The long influence of religion on the African-American slave experience has informed the way African-American children are reared. It in fact speaks to the ongoing condition in the general population for African-Americans. One of the well-identified holdovers of slavery is the method and frequency of violence used by the slave master for the purpose of compliance and training. Therefore, I conclude that the early use of whipping, beatings, and torture used by the white conservative Protestant mindset to achieve compliance from the slave continues unabated in the wider society and has become institutionalized within the African-American family for good and sometimes necessary reasons. We might all agree that the role and desire of the average parent is to make sure their child or children are safe and well cared for in order that our children may succeed in life. Obedience to instructions is seen as critical. Failure can certainly result in a negative outcome, namely death. Even compliance is not, at least for the African American, a guarantee that death won't be the result. Enslaved children were often made to watch as others were brutally beaten for minor infractions on the plantation. This served as a warning and a teachable moment to be used by those charged with caring for the child back at the slave quarters. As a result, the caregiver would engage in a transference of the white man's methods to both teach moral lessons as well as elicit compliance for good behavior. When coupled with alternative disciplinary measures, the use of the proverbial rod for African Americans represents just one more tool available in the home today. African American children are still sent out into a world that may show unreasonable hostility towards them, if only by virtue of the color of their skin.
Mrs. Spence, thank you, Esther. Those were great opening statements. We are going to move now into our lightning round. And here you're going to have the opportunity to cross-examine your opponent. Again, this is an open, non-structured dialogue, and it's the time is shared for both of you. So please, we're going to start this in a couple of seconds and just jump right into it. Question, interrogate, critique. It starts now.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay. Ms. Spence, I don't know how you want me to address you, if I should address you as Linda or Ms. Spence, but you may feel free
either
to
way,
address-
dear. I respond to either one.
All right, sounds fine. You can call me Esther.
Okay.
Okay, Linda. So since you seem to be leading the argument with spare the rod, I wanted to start there. So from the biblical sense, one of the arguments that was presented by Dr. Patton is that spare the rod itself was not necessarily meant to, from a Christian perspective, be taken in a literal sense, but rather there have been other interpretations of it, meaning knowledge or wisdom, or actually sparing the child the education that they would need to be able to make wise decisions and across a lifetime, right? With that said, and with everything else that you said, I do agree that there was definitely very clear indication, I think, that at least from the historical text, that the idea of spanking children is something that was adopted or transferred over from the European system into the enslaved or system of slavery, and then therefore transferred even further, as we have seen dictated through some of the text, to the slaves themselves, right? And reenacting that. Over time, as we go into like the Jim Crow era, you're looking at arguments for beating children, essentially, right? That stem from exactly what Linda had said, which is protecting them. Fear of being able to keep your children alive and clear of whatever the danger might be at the time. For us, current modern day, it's police brutality. Police brutality has been one for quite some time. Prior to that, it might have been just the general white citizenry and population and so on and so forth. So part of the daily teachings that we try to instill in our children to keep them safe. And one of the ways that we've done that historically is through spanking or beating children. And my argument stands that not only does it seem like the rest of the world is in consensus and is moving beyond us, we seem determined to hang on to these arguments, right? So I wanted to kind of ask you, like, for the spare the rod argument, one, what is your take on the idea that maybe it's not physical punishment, but wisdom that was, intended? And two, like, how, as far as recognizing and definitively recognizing, I should say, that this is a relic of the institution of slavery, why we should maintain it and keep it moving forward.
Well, like I said in my opening statement, that sometimes using some corporal punishment with African-American children in particular can be a useful tool, because we must prepare them for what they're going to meet out in the streets. If a child does not anticipate that they could get their head blown off just because they're complying with police orders, for example, then they're totally in the dark when they get pulled over for a nonviolent infraction, and then it escalates into something deadly. So if children are better prepared from the home, and I'm not talking about the kind of corporal punishment that is abusive, leaves scars, is psychologically demeaning, those kinds of things. I'm just talking about the way parents, grandparents, and other caregivers might use corporal punishment as an attention getter, because if you don't get their attention first, the law definitely will.
Okay. So it's hard for me to accept the notion that Black children can only learn through force when, like I said, the rest of the world does seem to be moving away from these arguments. So the UN, for example, has started, the UN actually has, and again, I apologize, I kind of had to pull all this together. I just want to make sure I'm giving you the right info. So the UN does have a charter on children. Let me just see if I could pull this back up so I can give you all the info. Pretty much stating, here we are. So the document that I'd like to have used here is the United Nations, through their Human Rights Division, has the Convention on Child. They held a convention on the rights of the child. The articles have been revisited and upheld, I believe, 3 times so far, where we are looking at the various rights and definitions for what types of protections children as citizens of the world, or as citizens of at least the member states, should be protected by. And of course, protection from their parents from this type of physical punishment is listed among them as something that the state does have a responsibility for, right? And the idea that as a global community, the rest of the world can recognize through science the adverse effects, but for the Black community, we are still saying that the only way our children can move forward, is or be protected or shielded, or the only way we can communicate with them is by physical punishment. Just flat on its face seems wrong, right? So there's that. In light of—
Okay, well,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, in light of like even the dire effects that the dire events and effects that we're living in underneath a white supremacist system, I still think there is a lot to be said for being able to use science as a background for driving away cultural norms that might be detrimental, especially if they've been proven detrimental the way corporal punishment has. The other thing is, I did want to address the fact that you define the way you're defining corporal punishment, you and I might not be completely in line. So yes, spanking, open palm, so on and so forth. The data seems pretty clear that spanking on a continuum, which inevitably it will always be administered on a continuum once you start, does lead to adverse effects regardless of how somebody might approach it. The effect, I believe, is called dosing. So when you start off with physical punishment, you have to be able to follow up with it. Over time, the aggression does tend to increase to be able to maintain getting that child's attention. And the need for that, the fact that the child will respond to physical punishment as opposed to being spoken to or negotiation, also just poor social skills, poor problem solving skills, just in general, does not lead to positive outcomes. If anything, it perpetuates even more adverse outcomes.
There are about 9 minutes left in this round, and I just want to make sure you both understand. You could go back and forth. You don't have to wait for your opponent.
Okay.
I want to make sure that you're not mischaracterizing my position. I'm not suggesting that that African American children can only be taught or disciplined with corporal punishment or via corporal punishment. What I'm saying is that corporal punishment can't be completely ignored, especially in the African American household. What needs to happen is that African American parents need better skills at how, when, and why they use it. For example, often corporal punishment in the African American community, especially where you have I don't want to say, who are poorly educated, who economically are deprived, the stress of life and bread and butter issues can be the driving force behind a parent taking those frustrations out on an unruly or misbehaving child. And so it can be impulsive. When that kind of thing is administered impulsively and get out of control, yes, it can lead to abuse. When it's used as a regular way to discipline, yes, it can get out of control. Yes, it can become very psychologically or physically abusive. Here is that corporal punishment can be used in such a way that with other means you can
is there any
discipline your child without affecting them negatively in life. I'm sorry.
Well, is there any literature that suggests that corporal punishment is more effective than other types of discipline?
Again, I'm not saying that it's more effective. I'm just saying that it doesn't have to be the bugaboo that some research has made it out to be. For Thompson Gershoff and her colleagues have done a meta-analysis. Have you read any of her work?
I actually do
any
have
of her
it up.
meta-analysis on? Okay, so
Yeah.
the problem, for example, with her research is that they lump non-abusive spanking or corporal punishment in with the more abusive type. There were only, I think, out of 75 individuals that participated, there were only 4 instances of research that they compared out of that 75, only 4 research projects that they compared all that information to. So, you know, it's like the researchers are not really doing a very good job of showing how corporal punishment paired with negotiation, timeouts, those measures don't have a long and lingering effect. I for one, use corporal punishment with my children, not often, but there were times when I needed to get their attention, and it worked just fine, and there's not a thing wrong with either one of them. You know,
well,
so that's where I'm coming from. I just wanted to make that clear.
Like it's difficult. Like hindsight is one of those things that's 2020, right? And because somebody seems like to be a well-adjusted adult, this is why I said mental health is also a crucial part of this conversation, because someone appears to be a well-adjusted adult and maybe they've checked all the marks that we look for, you know, as far as having maybe degree attainment and a decent career and so on and so forth. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going through the after effects of having grown up under the trauma, right? In a sense of a household that spanks, right? And there is a difference between spanking and abuse. I'm very clear, like, not that I personally recognize that there's a difference between the two, but I understand that for most people, there is a difference between the two. In my mind, there is not. On the note of the critiques of the study by Gershoff, not that the critiques themselves are completely dismissed, but there was, when the study was revisited and looked specifically at, hold on, I'm just going to pull it up, aggression, right? And misbehaviors and long-term, no, I'm sorry, not Gershoff, long-term non-compliance, even with the determination of lumping together various types. The one thing that was clear, even when you separated the various data sets, is that spanking is associated with increase in aggression over time in the child and increase in anxiety over the course of the lifetime, which from what we know of children who are spanked or abused in general, right? These are behaviors that are quickly identifiable by psychologists and other people who work with children on a spectrum of receiving corporal or physical punishment. The other thing too is in us tolerating, I'd be curious as to how you might speak to this as well, right? On us tolerating the existence of corporal punishment in our society. I don't know if many of our viewers are aware of this at this time, but for many of the states right here in the United States, corporal punishment still remains a form of discipline that is used in the classroom as well as in the household. And in those instances, just like with any other study that we've seen across the country, where you have an increased rate of application for Black children, corporal punishment is definitely one of those things where you see it used more frequently with Black children than you do with any other group. So sad to say that both in the household and outside the household, this is the message that we're pretty much giving to the our national community, I guess you could say, that the only way our children learn, right, is through physical punishment, and we can't let go of that. It kind of pains me to see like the pediatricians and other doctors who are from communities of color, specifically the Black community, coming out and advocating for maintaining this type of institution in hopes of not alienating parents. I don't think having the conversations is alienating. I think having the conversations and keeping people aware of what the data actually says, if we are true to the fact that, you know, we are all one, right? We are all human, and at the end of the day, we all deserve the same type of dignity. And if the research does bear out consistently, which it has across, I think, 5 or 6 decades at this point, that there are no real benefits to spanking. There's just a ton of adverse effects. That's what we should go by. You know, and that's what we need to start having as the dialogue in the pediatricians' offices and with the parents. And I agree with you that we do need to have alternatives replace them. But
I apologize.
Go ahead, Ms. Spence. You were saying?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there were a number of things that you brought up there, but I don't. I hope that a pediatrician is not encouraging the use of corporal punishment just so that she can get along with the parents, quote unquote. I would hope that a pediatrician would be able to back up their reasoning for advocating that or supporting that. Again, because when used in moderation, spanking can be no more harmful to a child than negotiations, timeouts. In fact, in my view, with some of the parents that I have interacted with, I noticed that those who spend a lot of time and effort negotiating with their children end up being manipulated by the child.
So from
Okay, so that's our time for the lightning round. We're going to move on to round 3. And here, this is where we're going to let our audience ask some questions. So we invite our audience members to submit questions for our debaters. Each participant will be given the chance to respond to each question uninterrupted. They'll get 1.5 minutes to respond. So please start submitting your questions now. As we bring up our audience questions, please be sure to support the growth of the Great Debate League by donating to us via Cash App. And we're going to get that on the screen right there. That's the Great Debate League. That's our cash tag. And also, we want to revisit our sponsor, Be Easy Graphics, is owned by Brian. You can support this Black veteran-owned enterprise today by visiting beeasygraphics.com and take advantage of a special they're running where they're doing promotional and video ads for just $199. It's a great company, and we hope that you check them out. And now we're going to take our first question. Oh, sorry about that. Can you give examples of when corporal punishment at home is appropriate? And we're going to start with Ms. Spence here, and then we'll go to Ms. Anglade.
Okay. Well, I mean, for example, if a child, just won't comply. Let's say that the child has been told more than once to pick up their toys, and they, in a defiant way, want to insist that they're not going to pick them up. They're just flat not going to pick them up. And they go to the living room and sit down and start to watch television. You're busy negotiating with the child to, come on, help mommy, or, come on, you need to pick up your toys, whatever rationale you try to present to the child still insists that, no, I'm not going to do it. It might be time to get that child's attention with, on the legs, as I used to call it with my kids, a little light sting on the legs to let them know that you mean business. This is not a game. I'm not one of your friends. I'm your mother. I need you to do this to help. It also helps to praise the child when it does comply. Had a conversation with a young mother just last night who wanted her son to help with taking down a small brick wall in front of their house. And she was so disappointed in the fact that, first of all, he was defiant, but finally did it with a lot of hemming and hawing and exhaustive talk. And then she felt even worse because of the way she had to get upset with him. She never spanked him, but she had to get upset with him to get him to do the work. That gave her a lot of stress, so that by the time the project was done, the kid now wants to take full control and full credit for having done this work, and ask, was she proud of him?
There's ever a time where nothing worth doing is easy, right? So definitely, and these are new muscles and these are new skills that, as in the African American community, that we would have to flex. I am definitely one of those people who had to flex them. So I am a mom of 4. My oldest is 16. I have a 13-year-old and I have 2 10-year-old boys. Bruce, as we started speaking a little bit earlier this week, knows that I have an autistic child among my brood, and hitting in our household is not allowed, right? Which has meant, yes, sometimes it means a lot of talking. I don't know any parents, however, who, regardless of where they stand on spanking, who don't go through frustrations with their kids. I think being frustrated and having your children, like struggle sometimes with compliance is just part of the parenting process. That said, when it comes to spanking, one of the things that I realized early on, and the data, like as doing the reading in preparation for this, did seem to bear out, is in order for any type of discipline to work, it has to be applied consistently. Right? It has to be applied consistently. It has to be applied when the misbehavior is happening. So spanking is one of those things that has limitations on it where you can't always consistently apply it. And if you did, you would be brutalizing the child all the time. So like I understand the way Linda's phrasing it by getting the child's attention. There are definitely better ways, I think, to get a child's attention if they're doing something that's self-harming or they're doing something that is just annoying, whatever it might be. Mainly, and
Sorry, you ran out of time there, Esther. Sorry about that. Okay, we're going to move to our next question. And here we're going to go back to you, Esther, for this one. This question is directed to you. What are your alternatives to physical discipline that are effective in Black households?
Okay, so again, new muscles for the Black household, right? Yes, new muscles for the Black household. A lot of this stuff I think will take time. So for me, myself, like for our own household, this has been taking some figuring out, more or less. My autistic son was probably the most challenging out of everybody. And each kid responds differently. Each personality is different. So my oldest, who's 16, is probably the person who gives me the easiest time. Punishing him, anything that removes electronics or anything that takes away his ability to access his technical universe of gamers does seem to work. But when things like that do not work, there's definitely other, like right now he's at an age where driving is important, social interaction with his friends is important. My daughter's just turned 13 last month, same thing for her, being able to access her friends, being able to do things socially. These are things that have become really important, and using those as, in a sense, rewards, right, to get the behaviors that I want. So a lot of it too is negative, like punishing negative behaviors, as Linda mentioned prior to, as opposed to rewarding the behaviors that you want. I do find that rewarding the behaviors does work better. I also highly, highly recommend to any of the parents that are out there to please read Mindset. It's a book that really focuses on the various types of mindsets that start in childhood with how to learn and grow and adapt. And a lot of the tools that I pick up in Mindset are the tools that I have used to help run my household and really get the types of young people in my household who I don't have to argue with as much as talk to. And
Okay, Linda, we're going to give you a different question because that one was directed especially to Esther. So Linda, here's your question. Do you believe that hitting children aids in white supremacy by teaching children to concede to physical authority?
Not necessarily, no. I don't think that, again, as I said in my opening statement, this whole notion of spanking and whipping whatever kids is a holdover from slavery. You parent the way you were parented, and the community of white folks is the parent of community of Black folk, psychologically speaking. African Americans suffer from a syndrome, oh God, what is it called? Anyway, but they suffer from a syndrome that makes you start to identify with your captor. And so you legitimize in your mind that, the things that the captor is doing to you, you're free to do to one another or to your offspring or whomever comes your way. Let me be clear, too, that spanking is only useful within a certain age range of children. You can't go around spanking 12 and 13-year-olds. That's only teaching you. So I'm not suggesting that spanking is something that you would be using often to that time. Also, I'm not suggesting that children with special needs should be physically punished. I'm just talking about, your normal, everyday, regular kid necessarily, not an autistic child. I have an autistic grandson. He got spanked, but, that might not have been the best thing for him. It wasn't my child. It was my son's child. So I didn't have a whole lot to say about that. But just to be clear on that. So I don't think it aids white supremacy.
All right, we have one more question for both of you. How do you isolate trauma to spanking if you are unable to control for other factors in the child's life, including diet, media consumption, as well as other forms of abuse? And we'll let you start with that one, Ms. Anglade.
Okay, so you can add unlimited numbers of variables to anything, right? So I don't think it's possible to say, hey, we're going to say that all these factors somehow must magically be involved in all the studies that have happened across 5 decades, right? And I can't understate that enough. This is something that's been studied. We're going on almost 60 years of studies now, and just about every corner that you could think of, as far as looking at different aspects of children's lives and well-being, from things as minor, really, right, as just spanking and hitting, to severe things as abuse that can lead to death, right? But that said, all that aside, even if you were to isolate for all these things, which right now I'm not saying you can, but let's say if you can isolate for all of these things in all of these studies, the consistent presence of spanking, whether one or the other variable is present, does seem to mean that it's something that warrants our attention. I think if you were to say some of the items that you listed, such as diet or media consumption, are items that can be assumed to be generally available throughout the population. And you look at other forms of abuse like sexual abuse, and that's something that's very well studied as well for its indicators. I just don't think it's fair to try to negate what has been seen for 60 years.
Ms. Spence, can you respond to this question?
Okay, again, at the outset, let me say that this, spanking is only going to work with a defiant child between, say, ages 2 to 6. So I'm going to keep my response to this to that set of kids. Those children, the other factors in their life, such as diet, media consumption, and other forms of abuse, can be controlled by the parent. And so as long as corporal punishment has ceased, at least no later than the age of 6, if by the age of 16, this child still has problems, I'd say you'd want to start looking at spanking as the root of the trauma that the child suffers. But I mean, that being said, older children, of course, you can't control for all of those kinds of things. You would definitely have to use certain tools that would ferret those things out, ferret out spanking, for example. You'd use a tool that would actually speak to, how often did you get spanked, or those kinds of things. So that would be the only way I'd see of isolating trauma to spankings in children between those younger ages, toddlers to 6-year-olds.
Okay, thank you. That was great. So now we're going to move to our fourth and final round, which is your closing statements. Each participant will be given 3 minutes uninterrupted to provide a closing statement. We will hear the affirmative closing statement from Esther first, and then we'll hear you, Mrs. Spence.
So I want to start off by thanking everybody for even creating the platform for this dialogue to take place. That said, I think this is a very important conversation. I think we are, as the Black community goes, we are still very much at the beginning of this conversation, where other communities may have moved on to accepting it as a consensus, but it is something that's worthy of discussion. The fact that the data consistently shows spanking does lead to outcomes over one's lifetime that are detrimental might help also explain, not entirely, because I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, some of the other poor outcomes that we do see in the Black community, right? So like if for example, we are creating households, this is actually, I'm going to take a step back. One of the things that I want to say, and I'm just going to speak to the audience directly on this, is most of us, I'm going to assume here, are Black, right? There might be other people watching, but I'm going to talk to the Black audience. When you're growing up in a Black household in America, and we all have had situations where we get together, we have jokes, and we make fun of the fact that we were beaten, or, we know children who were beaten and whatever might be, and so on and so forth. It doesn't change the fact that we are accepting that it's not the norm in other households. And the fact that our children go to school and are literally paired up with children who are glaring, right, with confidence in all these other areas. And we're raising adults who are carrying insecurities from childhood because of spanking and this need for us to raise children who are obedient to a fault almost, right? Who don't question, who don't really try to raise a fist of authority, whatever you might want to call it, right? They're antithetical and they kind of stand against what we as adults have to retrain ourselves to think about and do and respond to in the world. I just don't see a benefit to spanking. Personally, in my own parenting journey, early on, I didn't see a benefit to it. The data and the literature has borne out that there's very limited benefit to it. I think this is something that as a community, we've used it to help shape our identity. And I think white people, for the most part, have allowed us to keep it and make excuses through boards of the pediatric board, so on and so forth, that is alienating to the Black community and so on and so forth as exceptions to the norm and culture and heritage and so on and so forth. But really these things have nothing to do with the absolute science that says, well, not that science is absolute, but with the science that says there are better ways. And the way to get the best outcome out of your kids really will be to give them a sense of dignity, raise them in a way that will.
While mine is not a blanket endorsement for spanking, when done moderately, appropriately, and with little frequency, spanking can be a useful tool as part of a parent's disciplinary plan. Researcher Diana Baumrind et al. Suggests that, quote, those parents whose emotional makeup may cause them to cross the line between appropriate corporal punishment and physical abuse should be counseled not to use corporal punishment as a technique to discipline their children, end quote. Many African-American caregivers might fall into this category. Psychologist and researcher Dr. Robert Lazar posits that, quote, parents need better information about how to discipline their children in the most effective manner, end quote. Many conclusions reached in a leading meta-analysis by Elizabeth Gershoff were misleading, so says Dr. Lazar. Most studies in her review included overly severe forms of corporal punishment. He also points out that because most disciplinary tactics show some associations with detrimental outcomes, any manner of discipline is detrimental. That is to say, the methods employed by Gershoff using timeouts, reason, negotiation, or spanking can all be shown to be detrimental. Research can be skewed toward an author's desired outcome. In her critique on the topic, Virginia Pelle would agree that just because information is published does not make it necessarily reliable. And so for her, the danger lies in, quote, how scholars and certainly advocates cherry pick or show citation bias in their research, or who represent research in a distorted way to reach an advocacy goal, such as banning spanking, end quote. Therefore, caution must be used by those who unequivocally claim that such measures are ineffective in general and should be dismissed totally. For that reason, educating parents is key. Consider on average, African-American parents are more than twice as likely to use corporal punishment regularly and are far less likely to never spank their children than any other demographic group. Unless there are shown better, more effective ways of dealing with discipline issues, many parents, particularly African-American caregivers, will rely exclusively on physical measures. The lower the economic status, the less education, the greater the potential that a spanking risks becoming abusive. For many, and it may be true, nothing will ever take the place of a good old warming of the seat of the pants. Given the hypnotic hold the church has on African-American parents, the mantra of spare the rod, spoil the child will continue to echo as a legitimate rationale. Anglo-American psychologists, teachers, counselors, and certainly social workers must all develop more cultural competencies if they're going to help our parents understand how to best protect, nurture, and discipline the children. We parent the way we were parented. And for the majority of African-American adults who were not spared the rod once they became parents, will almost always rely upon spanking to achieve compliance. Again, depending on the emotional makeup of the adult, impulsive, inappropriate spanking can increase the danger of becoming abuse. Over time, we will learn that frequency, force, and appropriateness spanking aids in the goal of compliance while producing stable, contributing adults of the future.
Excellent job, ladies. That was an excellent job. I want to thank both of you, Esther Anglade and Linda Spence, for participating in the Great Debate League. I want to thank our audience for staying with us through that. And that was a really intense debate. Please remember to donate to our Cash App so we can continue to grow this platform, so we can get more women and men, just like you saw here, intellectual scholars to speak on our important issues. Also, check out our YouTube channel, the Great Debate League Incorporated, and also check us out on Instagram. And you can subscribe to our podcast on Spotify as well as iHeartRadio. Again, we want to thank our sponsor, Be Easy Graphics, for sponsoring tonight's event. For more information, make sure to visit their website, beeasygraphics.com, or you can find them on Facebook. Please join us immediately following this broadcast for the post-debate analysis. Have a great rest of your Saturday, and remember to speak the truth. I'm Dr. Bruce Strobel, and I'm out. This is another episode. Peace.